Morning folks, Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School, back with another video in our Fire School series. I thought what we'd do today is we'd move a little bit into ferrocerium rods. We have started at the beginning basically with friction fire. We've moved into flint and steel fires. We've talked about how to build proper bird nests, proper fire lays, processing tinder the correct way, different forms of tinder to include charred material, and we've spoken about solar embers and reflector type embers where you use the sun to create an ember or to ignite a charred material or a fungus. So what I want to do today is I want to move in our progression into ferrocerium rods, and the reason I'm doing that is it's a direct descendant basically of the flint and steel. The flint and steel, as we talked about before, works because you're removing iron particles which are pyrophoric, which means they combust in microscopic form when you have given them the three legs of fire. You are striking against the steel to add friction, which adds heat. You are removing material from the rod or from the steel itself, which gives you fuel, and you add oxygen to that and you get spontaneous combustion per se, which gives you an 800-degree spark that lands on your tinder or charred material. With the ferrocerium rod, there are multiple metals in the rod, not just iron, and all these metals are pyrophoric materials. Some of them burn hotter than others. The advantage to the ferrocerium rod, besides the fact that it will work even if it's gotten wet, you can just wipe it off or whatever and it'll work right away, is that the sparks are much hotter than from true flint and steel. Flint and steel sparks about 800 degrees, ferrocerium rod sparks are about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's a significant difference in what you can ignite and what types of tinders you can use to ignite with the ferrocerium rod compared to the flint and steel. What I want to discuss first in this ferrocerium rod portion of this series is how to properly use a ferrocerium rod, how to strike a ferrocerium rod, and how to drive that material from the ferrocerium rod to create those sparks. And understanding that magnesium, while it's a small portion of the makeup of the ferrocerium rod, those shavings of magnesium or those shavings of ferrocerium that come off of that rod are what really create molten type sparks that burn after the fact. And those are what you really want to ignite stubborn type tinders or more coarse tinders. So we're going to talk about the proper use of the ferro rod first. Stay with me, guys. Okay, so let's first talk about our ferrocerium rod. I want this rod to be as long and as big in diameter as I can stand to carry around with me, or the biggest one I can find. This one is 6 inches by a ½ inch, I believe. It's the one we saw on our website. That's going to give me the maximum amount of surface area. It's also going to give me a longer stroke, and it's going to last a long time. Now, some of these rods are a little bit different as far as the metal makeup and the hardness of the rod. I prefer a softer rod because I want that material that's burning after the fact in my tinder. That will ignite stubborn tinder. If I have something that only throws sparks because my rod's very hard, it's going to last longer, but it's not going to be as easy to ignite stubborn tinder. I don't care if this thing lasts me 4 years. What I care about is that it starts a fire when I have to have it. To make that happen, if this rod's a little softer, it's going to work better. Now, striking a ferrocerium rod, you can use a lot of things to do this with. All the handles on these ferrocerium rods that come commercially made come off. I haven't seen one yet that didn't come off, including the Gobspark by firesteels.com. I've seen those come off in classes before. The best thing that you can do is just wrap duct tape around the handle to give you a place to grip it. Then you've got something else you can use for fire as well, as a fire extender or flame extender. You can also ignite a bird nest or tinder bundle made from this stuff, and I've done a video on that in the past, and I may do it again just for this series. But the important thing to remember is that you need something to hold on to, especially if you got gloves on. So if you put a different handle on this that's not duct tape like this, you can use just about anything from antler to wood to bone, but you're going to want to pin that handle in there by drilling a hole with a variable speed drill on a slow pace, slow rotation. Drill it through there, put a pin in there and epoxy that pin through there. That'll keep that rod from ever coming off. Once you get to that, then we need to talk about the strikers. And most of these rods will come with a striker. Some of them are marginal, some of them are good, but it's another piece of equipment to have to carry. Something else I have to have attached to the rod, something I've got to keep in my pocket. There's a lot of things in nature that will talk about that you can use for strikers on ferrocerium rods. The only thing that really matters is that it is harder than the surface of the rod. That's why, generally speaking, I tell people to make sure that the blade of your knife has a good 90-degree spine on it, so that you can use the blade of your knife as a striker and never have to worry about finding something, because your knife is always going to be on you. And those burning embers that are rolling around here is exactly what I'm looking for. Those after the fact sparklers are what's going to ignite marginal tinder. So if you've got a knife with a good 90-degree spine on it, you should have a striker on you all the time. Now, one of the things that I tell people is don't carry your main ferrocerium rod on your knife sheath. And you can see that I would, most of the time when I carry my knives, there's no ferro rod attached to that knife. And the reason is, if I have one attached to my knife sheath, it's a backup ferro rod. I always have one in my pocket or in my pack or in my haversack or in my belt pouch, usually all of the above. And my main one is usually in my belt pouch, so that I can use that one, and the emergency backup becomes the one that's on my knife sheath. This is the one that I use the majority of the time. So we talked about the knife being able to drive material off of this to affect ignition. One of the best things that you can possibly use in all actuality is glass. A broken piece of glass works fantastic as a striker. You can see very little effort involved in that whatsoever. I mean, I'm barely even pushing on that. It's a lot less effort with this than even with my knife. Unfortunately, glass is everywhere, so it's something that's very easy to find. If you dull the edge, you can just get another piece of glass. But this is a very good way to make sparks with your rod. Pulling the rod toward you is the best form that you can use, not pushing away. Now, there are times that you may want to hold the rod steady and drive sparks down on the rod, depending on the tinder source that you're using, like this. And this is generally the easier way for a child to do it. But you really don't want to be doing this, because then you're going to knock your tinder bundle around. Either get this rod on a solid surface and drive sparks straight down the rod, like this. Starting to dull my glass now a little bit. Like that. Or pull the rod towards you like this. A piece of flint from your flint and steel kit, or that you find in the ground, anything that's harder than a rod is going to work. Quartz, flint, chert, any of that stuff will work. You just got to find a good sharp edge. And it will work. Things like this metal striker that we made with this arrowhead, this prototype that I have, the edges on this are 90 degrees for a reason. They were made 90 degrees to use on a rod. So again, the proper way to use a ferro rod is either pull the rod towards you or get the rod on a solid surface and scrape material off the rod. But those things that are burning on their plank here after the fact, those are the things that are going to ignite marginal tinder for you. Just a quick demo with the glass for you guys here. This is some tulip poplar. It was actually laying out here on the ground, so it's by no means bone dry. And if I can't expose some fine fibers in here, a ferrocerium rod, I don't have to be near as picky with this stuff as I have to if I'm trying to make something I'm going to ignite with an ember from flint and steel or from a bow drill set. You can see it's flaming up, but it's definitely wet. There we go. Yeah, this is definitely a wet bundle of material, but you can still get it to work if you properly use your rod. Those sparking things, those are pieces of the material driven off the rod that are laying there just now catching fire when the heat's connecting to them. Okay, so real quick, let's talk about the fungus real fast here, because we've got a chunk of fungus. Let's take some of this and just kind of scrape it down with this tool here real quick. And I'm just kind of raking the edge of it. With the sharp edge of this tool. Glass would work the same way. I could do the same thing with glass if I had to. If I didn't have my knife. So if I had my knife, I wouldn't be using this glass to strike my flint with. So I can scrape this with the sharp edge of the glass and affect the same thing and get myself a pile here. And once I've got that pile of material from my fungus, find a good sharp edge here on the glass. There we go. And you can see how quick that went up. That's a nice big burning ember right there. And it'll slowly coagulate into a bigger ember if I just give it time. The ferro rod's going to light that stuff right up. Okay, let's talk about fat wood for a minute here. We take a piece of fat wood, we can do the same thing with this glass. This glass becomes our tool, much like our knife. And we just scrape this down. Staying on an edge, and we rotate that a little bit, and that's going to give us a continuous edge to work with. And we just keep working that down until we have about a dime-sized pile of this fat wood. Again, the great thing about glass is if it gets dull, you just go find another piece of glass. It's not that difficult. Glass is a fantastic tool that unfortunately is a very realistic tool to find nowadays in the eastern woodlands, with beer bottles and glass soda bottles that are everywhere. There we go. Just a piece of glass, some fat wood, and our ferro rod. You know, I keep talking to you guys about the site, www.audible.com/wilderness. And I was looking at a book on there this morning called Before 1776, Life in the American Colonies. And it's by a man named Professor Robert J. Allison, and it's about 33 hours. It's basically a historical text or lecture on the development of the colonies based around slavery, the sugar trade. It talks about some of the outer colonies of Europe, in the Netherlands, in Spain, in France, places like that. I think it's going to be a really interesting thing for me to listen to in some of my spare time. I'm going to travel next week to Missouri to film some stuff for the television show that we're working on now with Hunt Channel TV. Planning on listening to it on my drive to Missouri. So I would encourage you to go to audible.com and check them out. There's lots and lots. There's 150,000 titles there, I believe, and I've been finding a lot of good stuff to listen to. You know, again, it's a lot easier sometimes for me to listen to an audible book or an audio book than it is to sit down and try to read something, especially if I'm driving or traveling. All right, guys, well, that was just a couple quick tips or tricks using your ferro rod. Again, you don't have to have the striker that comes with that ferro rod. You don't necessarily have to have a 90-degree edge on your knife. It just makes your knife more multifunctional, but there's plenty of things that you can find in nature that will strike sparks or drive material off your ferrocerium rod. I'm Dave Canterbury with Pathfinder School. I appreciate everything you do for me, for my school, for my friends, my sponsors, my affiliates, my instructors and friends. I appreciate everything you do for our business and for our school, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.